This song is good. Start from the beginning. The cradle of democracy, the heart of paradise, and the center of the universe, Brussels keeps repeating the worn-out mantra. Elections in Belarus are neither free nor fair, and the country is essentially one big prison. What, straight to handcuffs or worse? But this time, thanks to Hungary. They haven't believed in such nonsense for a long time, so they blocked the common resolution. Kaja Kallas and her like-minded friend had to take the heat. But she was reminded that no one elected her.
It's democratic, she thinks so, and I think so. Right that the Belarusian circus considers her an illegitimate head of EU diplomacy. We don't know. We weren't invited to her election. We didn't observe, didn't see, didn't attend. We don't know how this procedure took place at all. But also right that we do not recognize her as legitimate.
In recent years, Minsk has learned a lot from its mistakes. Agree, 2020 was quite a ride for us. But instead of recalling past events, we can look at Georgia. The ruling Georgian Dream Party won the parliamentary elections, a party not approved by Brussels. Therefore, such a victory was also not recognized by the democratic community. The subsequent attempt at a Maidan fortunately failed, but it was followed by another destabilization tool, sanctions. And the hand-picked observers eventually recorded serious violations, although they initially had a different opinion. During the election campaign, both ruling and opposition parties reported attacks on staff and their property. Throughout the period, there were reports of intimidation, coercion, and pressure on voters, especially on public sector workers and economically vulnerable groups. Some voters could not freely express their opinions and vote without fear, which contradicts international standards. Remember the elections in Moldova where overnight Sandu went from rags to riches. After consulting with Brussels, they made a bold move, depriving hundreds of thousands of people of their voting rights and adding non-existent ones. Former Prosecutor General Alexander Stoyanoglo was leading in the presidential race when counting within the country. But everything changed dramatically with the transition to overseas polling stations. No surprise, Sandu became president again. But it turns out, not of her own people, but of the diaspora. Even by Western standards, the unconvincing victory upset both her and Brussels. But no one dared to think that Moldovans were already fed up with the European dream, so they all turned to Russia. Foreign interference and manipulation by Russia and its proxies are multifaceted. These are long-term efforts that we have observed for a long time.
Moldova faced an unprecedented attack in the history of all Europe. Dirty money, illegal voter bribery, involvement of hostile forces outside the country, and criminal groups.
And the most disgusting part of the story is that no one even squeaked when national observers recorded nearly 800 violations during the voting, and they are silent about the fact that in the second round, the number of voters increased by 90,000. And out of 500,000 Moldovan diaspora in Russia, only 10,000 could vote. There simply weren't enough ballots for the rest. Well, okay, Moldova. They're pulling the country into the EU by hook or by crook, but substitutions and manipulations are apparently a hallmark of the old world. The early elections to the French Parliament are a perfect confirmation. The triumph of the right-wing National Union in the first round turned into a fiasco in the second. The alliance of left-wing parties with Macron's ruling party bore fruit. And voila, no violations.
The second round, it seems, was designed precisely to manipulate the will of the voters in the first round. When some candidates can withdraw their candidacies, they are persuaded to clear the way to defeat, as they say, conservatives or populists. It doesn't quite resemble democracy.
But what did this criminal deception lead to? The victorious left pulls the blanket over themselves, Macronists and the right over themselves, and to the fragmented society there was added a similar government. Premiers change like gloves, and this process seems unstoppable. Do you know what happens if, by some miracle, someone completely unexpected wins the elections? That's right, the people's will can be declared invalid. So the Constitutional Court of Romania simply nullified the entire presidential election process, where Călin Georgescu was the leader in the first round. The politician was immediately accused of collaborating with Russia and almost of attempting an undemocratic seizure of power. According to the court, voters were misinformed, and the electoral process was distorted. Our democracy is under threat. We see party bosses trembling with fear. They fear losing power and privileges, returning to the insignificance from which they were brought out. In essence, on this day, the corrupt system in Romania showed its true face and made a pact with the devil. Now elections are scheduled for May 4th. Meanwhile, Georgescu maintains the highest ratings among candidates. But who knows what might happen in such a time? However, the last months of spring promise to be hot. On May 18th, the presidential elections in Poland will take place. The previous ones, where Duda snatched a second term, were bright and memorable. Obvious falsifications and deceit were so disliked by the Poles that they continued to make noise for a long time in an attempt to achieve justice. This time, let's hope they succeed. And we are always ready to confirm unwavering support for the Polish people in their movement towards democracy, freedom, and human rights.